Everything changed on the third day of dog-sitting. The first 2 days spent with Nathan and Elisa's 3 spoiled poodles had not been a dull affair. Daisy had made a quick but memorable escape into the neighbor's yard, and Baxter had already chewed one of my slippers. Though I wouldn't realize the extent of the change until much later, my life began to twist on its axis on that third morning. In contrast to my small apartment with its well-kept potted plants and shelves of well-worn books, I had found a comfortable routine in my son's expansive suburban home. I had an orderly mind and a fondness for the written word from my 40 years as a librarian, which seemed at odds with the frantic energy of 3 dogs who were not used to my slower pace. I whispered to the biggest of the 3, "Steady, Winston." When he needed attention, the huge gray standard poodle had the unsettling habit of pressing all of his weight against my legs. "In a moment, we'll step outside." Nathan and Elisa's kitchen was stunning but daunting, with its immaculate white counters and dazzling stainless steel. Even though Nathan had told me to settle down before they went, I was always conscious about leaving water stains or fingerprints. With that old smile warming his face, he had placed his hand on my shoulder and murmured, "Really, Mom, just relax. For 2 weeks, mi casa es su casa." However, it didn't feel like home. Not with its lofty ceilings and contemporary artwork that, in my mind, appeared more like accidents than deliberate works of art. Not when Elise is always reminding them in a subtle way how to fill their dishwasher and what temperature the thermostat should be set to. Despite my son's promises, I was still hesitant to use their daily objects, so I poured my morning coffee into one of the fragile bone china mugs Elise kept for visitors. I could see the well-kept backyard from the kitchen window, where the dogs would soon be playing. The morning of spring was lovely. Through the recently leafed oak trees, sunlight dapples the pricey patio furniture. I turned to face the anticipatory dogs and said, "All right, you 3. Come on, let's go outside." By now, the ensuing turmoil was expected. The frantic run through the back door, tangled leashes, and excited barking. Winston pulled so hard that my coffee spilled over the cup's rim and into my cardigan sleeve, almost causing me to lose my footing on the back steps. I gave Winston's heel as much authority as I could muster, but the huge poodle ignored me as much as he would a passing butterfly once we were in the yard. The dogs dispersed in 3 different directions. Winston explored the flower beds with frightening curiosity, Daisy rolled wildly in a patch of grass, and Baxter chased imaginary prey along the fence line. "Not the hydrangeas, Winston. It's too late." Elisa's precious blue hydrangeas had already been tossed to the ground like floral confetti when the giant dog rushed through them. With a sigh, I placed my coffee cup on the patio table and rushed to get him out of there before more harm could be done. I heard the crash from inside the home at that moment. My heart thumped. Had I not shut the rear door? I was positive I had. Apparently not entirely, though. I turned to see it standing open, and the sound of something falling or being knocked over reverberated from inside. "Oh no." Winston unwillingly accompanied me as I hurried back to the home, muttering, "Daisy. Baxter. Remain." Though I didn't think I would be heeded, I called over my shoulder. The culprit was readily visible inside. In the entryway, a tall, thin vase had been overturned by Coco, the tiny chocolate toy poodle that I had somehow missed in the morning commotion. The wooden floor was puddled with water. Like the victims of a small-scale domestic catastrophe, white lilies were dispersed. Coco. With a sigh, I fastened Winston's leash to a doorknob and then went to the crime scene. "Have you done anything?" The small dog backed away from the mess with her tail between her legs, displaying humiliation with grace. The others were now gathered around the back entrance, interested in the disturbance, so I gently pushed her in that direction. I went back to inspect the damage after safely securing all 4 dogs in the yard. Fortunately, the vase had not cracked, but the pale wood was stained with orange pollen from numerous lily blossoms, and water had soaked between the floors. I rushed to get towels from the kitchen, wiping the pollen spots gently and dabbing at the water. Of course, Elise would notice. She saw it everything. But maybe there wouldn't be any harm if I moved fast enough. I noticed something strange as I was working. Underneath the office door, which stood slightly open, the water had flowed in a tiny trickle. I pulled the door open further, worried that the pricey hardwood would be damaged, and bent down to clean up the water's trail. I saw it at that moment. In Nathan's home office, the water had soaked beneath the massive bookcase that took up one wall and seemed to be collecting behind it instead of in front of it. Out of curiosity, I ran my palm down the bookcase's base and found a tiny opening that would allow water to seep through. That's odd, I thought to myself. As part of the office's unique design, the bookcase appeared to be built in. Why would a gap exist? I was overcome by curiosity, which is a lifelong librarian's job peril. I put down my towel and took a closer look at the bookshelf. It was crammed with family pictures, business books, and all of Nathan's accolades and honors from his financial career. Nothing out of the ordinary. However, there was a tiny give when I lightly pressed on one side. The bookcase shifted. Only a tiny bit, just a fraction of an inch, but enough to verify that it wasn't genuinely incorporated into the wall as it seemed. Okay. That's strange, I murmured out loud, exerting a little more effort. The bookcase turned slightly outward, exposing a little area behind it that resembled a secret alcove. My initial thought was pragmatic. I had to check this secret area to make sure nothing valuable had been harmed by the water. My second idea, which came right after the first, was that by looking into it more, I was infringing on my son's privacy. With one hand still resting on the bookcase's edge, I paused. Nathan and Elise had a right to their privacy and their secrets. I wasn't there to look through their stuff, I was here to take care of their dogs. The mystery of a secret room beneath a bookcase, however, was too alluring to the librarian in me, the part that had spent decades arranging material and resolving research conundrums. It reminded me of a mystery novel that I really liked. I pushed the bookshelf a few inches farther and told myself that I was merely checking for water damage. I could see something red in the little light from the office window, but the area behind was dark. Something like a portfolio or folder, standing straight up against the wall. I merely wanted to see if it was wet from the water that had spilled as I reached in. My heart almost stopped as I took it out. It was an expensive-looking, bright red folder that was sealed with a black elastic band. My name, Grace Winters, was printed in strong black letters on the front. That wasn't all, though. A recent photo, shot at Nathan's birthday dinner 2 months ago, was shown beneath my name. Me grinning, not realizing that my picture had been taken and used for. What precisely? Water forgotten, I stood motionless with the crimson folder in my shaking hands. Dogs barking in the yard in the distance. Why would my son have my name and photo in a secret folder? What on earth would be inside that required hiding beneath a fake bookcase? My mind was racing with a dozen possible reasons. Each one is more unlikely than the others. A surprise gathering? Making a financial strategy to aid in my retirement? A family history project of some sort? However, none of these theories could explain the secret, the concealed compartment, or the closed office that I had only been able to enter due to Coco's vase-related tragedy. I touched the folder's elastic band with my fingers. It would be an obvious violation of my privacy to open it, but my name and photo were on the front. This, whatever it was, directly affected me. The dog's more persistent barking drew me out of my tumultuous reverie. Before I made any judgments regarding this disturbing revelation, I needed to let them back in, clear up the leftover water, and restore order. I carefully put the folder back where I'd found it and repositioned the bookcase. While I cleaned up the water, the dogs could wait a few more minutes. The image of the red folder with my name burning in my head like a warning flag, I worked carefully while my mind raced. I had already made up my mind when I let the dogs back in. I would hold off until the dogs were calmed down in the evening. Then I'd go back to the office, get the folder, and find out why my son was hiding things from me. I had no idea that the information concealed beneath that straightforward red cover would completely alter my perception of my family, my history, and my prospects. All in one evening. With painful slowness, the day slid by. I took care of the dog, fed him, walked him, and played with him, but my thoughts were always focused on the red folder that was concealed under the bookcase. The magnetic attraction of the hidden secret carrying my name made my steps slow every time I passed Nathan's office door. I muttered to myself, not yet. Hold off till the evening. 6 o'clock. After feeding the dogs dinner, I put them to bed in the family room while they watched their favorite TV program, some animal-themed show that kept them engrossed for at least an hour. I eventually made my way back to Nathan's office, quietly shutting the door behind me after having a cup of tea to calm my anxieties. Now the space had a different feel. Family pictures grinning down from the walls, Nathan's graduation, his marriage to Elise, the four of us at Christmas last year, ordinary, joyful times that suddenly felt suspicious in the presence of secret files and hidden compartments, were charged with possible discoveries. I didn't hesitate any longer and went straight to the bookshelves. I pressed hard, finding the edge that had given way previously, and the case swung outward a couple of inches. I left the red folder exactly where I had left it, as though anticipating my return. I purposefully took it out this time and carried it over to Nathan's desk. I took off the elastic band and opened the cover in the light of his fancy desk lamp. My heart almost stopped reading the first page. Walter Edmund Winters's last will and testament. Walter, my uncle? My father's eccentric older brother had vanished into the Vermont countryside decades ago, only to reappear at the rare family funeral, and I hadn't given him any consideration in years. When I last heard from him, he was writing esoteric historical papers that no one read while living as a recluse on some historic property. I looked at the date on the will. Walter had passed away only 6 months prior. Why hadn't I been informed? I turned the page and read through the formal legalese until I came to the section about asset distribution. My legs were suddenly unable to sustain my weight, so I had to sit down. My great-niece Grace Eleanor Winters, my only living blood-related, will inherit all of my assets, property, and possessions, which are worth about $4.7 million USD. $4. $7 million? Uncle Walter was wealthy like that? And he had let me handle everything? Confusion replaced disbelief. Why hadn't I been informed if this were the case? What prevented Nathan from informing me that I had inherited a fortune? The first hint was found in the following document, a certified letter sent to Nathan 3 months ago from the Braddock & Sons legal company. As my next of kin, it formally informed him that all efforts to get in touch with me personally had been unsuccessful. And it asked him to find me so it could tell me about my inheritance. Didn't get in touch with me? I had spent 15 years living in the same flat. It had been 20 years since I had changed my phone number. I wasn't really hiding. A handwritten message in what I knew to be Elise's exact script was hidden behind this letter, and it sent a chill down my spine. Avoid forwarding. Grace must remain unaware until the plan is carried out. We will intercept all calls from area codes in Vermont. My hands started to tremble. They had purposefully kept me in the dark about this gift. However, why? As I went through the folder, the solution became apparent. According to financial records, Nathan and Elise were not the prosperous power couple they were depicted as. They had an underwater mortgage. Credit card bills revealed debts of more than $150,000. Reports on investments revealed disastrous losses in high-risk endeavors. The foreclosure process will start next month, according to a notification sent out just 2 weeks ago. My son and his spouse were in danger of going bankrupt. The scenario darkened farther into the folder. The Project Inheritance document contained a comprehensive strategy with time frames and bullet points. Make the necessary power of attorney paperwork. Finished. Find out Grace's identity. Finished. Samples of secure signatures. Finished. As Grace, contact the executor. In progress. Make an inheritance claim prior to the contestation date. Planned. I discovered, to my increasing dismay, a counterfeit power of attorney that looked to be signed by me but wasn't. Information on a bank account I had never opened in my name. A photocopy of my driver's license, which I had to replace after it vanished last month. A receipt for a gray wig that was styled like my hair, theatrical makeup for age effects, and a woman's name and phone number were the most unsettling items of all. Impersonation consultant Angela Weaver. The excursion to the Caribbean was a deception. It was a fictional anniversary party. The timeline indicated that Elise and Nathan were in Vermont at the time, getting ready for this Angela person to pretend to be me in order to get my fortune. I sat back, my tea cold and long forgotten. The dog's program was over. The barking in the adjacent room seemed insignificant in comparison to the betrayal that was meticulously explained to me. Before I even knew it existed, my own kid was plotting to defraud me of millions of dollars, use my identity as a ruse to claim an inheritance that was rightfully mine. As I read Nathan bedtime stories as a young child, I imagined his solemn eyes gazing up at me. Holding my hand at the funeral was the adolescent who had supported me after my husband's passing. The young man who had promised to look after me no matter what. What was the fate of the son? Had financial difficulties so thoroughly warped him? Or did Elise have an impact on this? In any case, the folder in my hand symbolized the demise of my faith in my only child as well as a hidden fortune. With shaky fingers, I collected the paperwork, my thoughts already racing. I had less than 2 weeks left until the contestation deadline, whatever that meant legally, based on the time frame. I have less than 2 weeks left to prevent my own son from embezzling millions of dollars. I didn't miss the irony. After 40 years of assisting others in locating information, knowledge had finally found me in the most terrible way imaginable. A tiny business card dropped out of the folder as I was closing it. Harrison Braddock, the estate lawyer who handled Uncle Walter's estate and who Nathan reportedly intended to trick with a fake me, had a Vermont phone number. The card was tucked into my pocket. One thing was certain, but tomorrow would demand determined action and clear thinking. My son thought I would be a helpless victim, but I wouldn't be. Even though I was only a librarian to them, they were going to learn that power really comes from knowledge, and I had just gained both. I woke up to find the red folder open next to a freshly brewed cup of coffee, a legal pad with my neat handwriting on it, and all 3 of my dogs snoring happily at my feet at Nathan and Elise's kitchen table. I hadn't slept much. Like the well-organized librarian I'd been for 40 years, my mind was cataloging and cross-referencing the sources. I had the rudiments of a plan by morning. Protecting my legal claim to the bequest without telling Nathan and Elise about my findings should be my top concern. Discretion and grace would be needed for this. Years of assisting researchers in finding sensitive information without announcing their interests to the entire library had helped me develop these 2 traits. I angled my body toward the window to catch the early morning light, picked up my phone, and dialed the number on Harrison Braddock's business card. 2 rings later, a clear, businesslike voice picked up. Braddock and Sons represents estate lawyers. In what way may I route your call? Please, I'd like to talk to Harrison Braddock, I said, maintaining a steady tone. I inquired about Walter Edmund Winters's estate. Who is calling, may I ask? I inhaled deeply. This is his great-niece, Grace Winters, who is reportedly his heir. A moment's silence. Just a minute. Winston stirred at my feet, and I caressed his smooth head while I waited. I was steadied by the gesture's normalcy. A reminder that life went on even after I learned of my son's treachery. An older, deeper voice called out, Ms. Winters. Harrison Braddock is this person. For months, I've been trying to get in touch with you. With caution, I said, I'm just learning that. Your communications appear to have been interfered with in some way. Interference? His professional interest hardened his tone. What interference? It's not that simple, Mr. Braddock. And I wouldn't want to talk about it on the phone. I can tell you that I only learned about Uncle Walter's death and my inheritance yesterday, and that was by chance. He stated that was the most irregular. Certified letters were delivered to your address. We called a lot of numbers. Although your son assured us that he had told you, you were coping with health problems and wanted him to take care of the initial steps. Health problems? I had underestimated the extent of the fabrications. I am in excellent health, Mr. Braddock, and I was totally ignorant of my inheritance until yesterday. Furthermore, even though no one could hear me, I went on, lowering my voice. I have cause to suspect that someone may be posing as me in an attempt to fraudulently claim the bequest. The line was silent for a while, then there was the rustle of papers. These are grave accusations, Ms. Winters. We have identification verification procedures in place specifically to stop these kinds of incidents. But if what you're saying is accurate, we ought to get together right away. I looked at the red folder's chronology. My son and his wife may be visiting with your office this week. I think they are now in Vermont. Yes, that's right, he said. He sounded surprised. Last week, Nathan Winters got in touch with us to arrange a meeting for tomorrow. He said that in order to finish the inheritance process, he would be taking you along. My heart pounded. I won't be the woman he brings, Mr. Braddock. I understand. His voice had changed to one of serious alarm. Where are you right now, Ms. Winters? While they are ostensibly on vacation in the Caribbean, a vacation that is obviously not happening, I am at my son's house in Connecticut, looking after their dogs. Connecticut? He sounded reflective. The travel from our Burlington offices is about 4 hours. Before your son's checkup tomorrow, is it possible for you to visit Vermont today? I thought about the practicalities. Although Nathan's normal dog walker came every afternoon, the dogs would still require attention. Nathan wouldn't be aware that I had left the house if I left a note stating that I had to go to the doctor and would return before nightfall. I can arrive by early afternoon, yes. Fantastic. Bring several different types of identification. Any document that has your picture on it, such as your driver's license, passport, if you have one, or social security card. We must clearly confirm your identity. I get it. What about Mr. Braddock? I paused. As discreetly as possible is how I would like to address this matter. Despite his obviously bad decisions, my kid is still my son. Of course, he said, his tone a little softer. Family issues are never easy. We'll move forward with the proper tact. I hung up and took a moment to process the reality of what I was about to do. I went from dog-sitting to spotting fraud to organizing a secret trip to collect a multi-million-dollar inheritance in a single day, all the while attempting to deal with my only child's devastating betrayal. The trusting eyes of the dogs stared up at me as I glanced down at them. I scratched behind Baxter's ears and whispered, "At least you three aren't planning to harm me." I quickly jotted down a list of essentials: identity documents, roadside food, comfortable driving attire, and, above all, the red folder containing all the damning evidence, with a newfound sense of resolve. I packed everything in my sensible handbag in less than an hour. I made sure the dogs had enough food and water, left a note for the dog walker stating that I had a medical appointment and would return by evening, and put it in a visible area on the kitchen counter. By 2 o'clock, when I would be well on my way to Vermont, the usual walker, who had a key, would let herself in. I had an odd feeling as I pulled my small vehicle out of Nathan's driveway. Something unexpected, not just hurt or rage. Thrills. My existence had consisted of work, peaceful reading evenings, and sporadic trips to see Nathan's family for decades. I was now 68 years old and starting a journey that only a few days before would have seemed unthinkable. I didn't miss the irony. I had been viewed by Nathan and Elise as a simple target, a gullible mother who was easily tricked and influenced. They had seriously underestimated me. Forgetting that librarians are trained to investigate information trails and unearth buried truths, making them effectively skilled detectives. I let myself a tiny, determined smile as I turned onto the highway and headed north. A crucial mistake had been made in their calculations. I was just a supporting character in their story, they had thought. I was writing my own, and they were going to find out. In front of me, Interstate 91 extended like a ribbon of opportunity, bringing me north across the green embrace of Vermont and Massachusetts. My most unusual day was set against the traditional New England backdrop of white church steeples, colonial houses, and rolling hills that were just starting to bloom in the spring. I didn't turn on the radio since I preferred the purity of silence for structuring my ideas. Throughout my upbringing, Uncle Walter had been the family's enigma, showing up occasionally. Often shared tales of his travels and amazing presence. He was a historian whose life had been dominated by his fascination with revolutionary battle objects, and my father had alternatively called him brilliant and impossible. I recalled when I had last seen him. 12 years ago, Walter had stood clumsily at the edge of the crowd at my husband George's funeral, his white beard carefully cropped and his tweed jacket mended at the elbows. At the moment, he had murmured something that seemed strange while pressing my hand. "The only person to inherit Frederick's intelligence is you. When the moment comes, keep that in mind." Frederick, a Columbia professor of American history, was the father of my father, Walter, and my grandfather. I had at the time assumed that Walter's remark was the result of nostalgia brought on by loss. I now pondered whether it had been more, maybe a clue to his intents. The Green Mountains emblem and the Vermont welcome sign, a relic from childhood holidays, came into view. The GPS indicated that I was just over an hour away from Braddock and Sons' offices in Burlington. My hands gripped the driving wheel tighter as the truth of what was waiting for me there, the validation of my son's treachery and my inheritance, became more solidly ingrained in my mind. I had to take a moment to stretch my legs and gather myself, so I got out at a rest stop. The earthy promise of spring and the fresh aroma of pine filled the April air. I contacted the dog walker while I was standing next to my car to make sure she had located my message and that the dogs were acting appropriately. "Jenny told me they were all right, Mrs. Winters, although Winston seemed to be trying to find you." Continues to inspect the bedrooms. I was suddenly moved to tears by the seemingly innocuous conduct of dogs. "Jenny, thank you. By the evening, I should be at home." I thought of Nathan and got back on the road. What dire situation had inspired my honest, hard-working son to devise such a complex lie? There was obviously more to the story than the disastrous losses revealed by the financial figures in the red folder. Before turning to fraud, the Nathan I had reared would have sought my assistance. The most likely cause seems to be Elisa's influence. Nathan had progressively taken on her materialistic ideals and her fixation with appearances since they were married 8 years earlier. The large showplace they now occupy had replaced the small house they had originally bought, complete with fancy automobiles and furnishings that appeared to grow every time you went. However, placing blame wouldn't address the current issue. After securing my inheritance, I had to choose how to tell Nathan and Elise what I knew. It did not please me to think of the smug certainty in their eyes being replaced with disappointment. This was only a bone-deep sadness for our family. With its tiny skyline tucked away against the wide blue expanse of Lake Champlain, Burlington emerged on the horizon. I went to a majestic brick building on Church Street that had a bronze inscription that read, "Braddock and Sons, Esther, 1897, after following the GPS directions. Evidently, this establishment had been trusted with the posthumous affairs of generations of Vermont's wealthiest families. I parked in the visitor's spot and looked in the rearview mirror to see how I looked. Despite having the same laugh lines and silver hair, the face that gazed back seemed different in some way. However, there was a fresh resolution and steeliness in the eyes that I had never observed before. I picked up the red folder, smoothed my cardigan, and went inside. There was an air of vintage professionalism in the reception area. Oriental rugs, leather seats, and oil portraits of stern-looking men who must have been the Braddock's predecessors. As I walked in, a young woman at an old desk looked up. "Could I be of assistance to you? My name is Grace Winters. I am scheduled to see Harrison Braddock." Her eyes sparked with recognition. "Ms. Winters, of course. There's Mr. Braddock waiting for you. Follow me, please." I was instantly calmed by the sight of the volumes lining the hallway as she escorted me to a corner office with windows facing out over the lake. As I walked in, Harrison Braddock out from behind a huge desk. He had silver hair and the gentle eyes of someone used to helping customers through challenging changes, and he was older than I had anticipated, possibly in his 70s. He held out his hand and said, "Ms. Winters. I appreciate you arriving so quickly. Have a seat, please." I took out my driver's license, passport, and social security card and laid them on the desk as I sat down in the leather chair across from him. "I brought the documents you asked for." He nodded while carefully going over each page. "And do you have any pictures of your family? Is there a picture of you with your dad, or maybe Walter?" Using my librarian's inclination for meticulous record-keeping, I dug into my purse and took out a tiny photo album I had grabbed before I left. "This is Walter's younger brother. My father, James Winters. And this is a picture of Walter standing next to my father at my wedding. Braddock looked from them to me as he studied the pictures. Indeed, there is a noticeable family resemblance, especially around the eyes. Like Walter, you have the eyes of Winter. His face changed to one of more alarm as he handed back the identity and photos. Now, Miss Winters, explain me exactly how you found out about your inheritance and why you think there might be fraudulent attempts to claim it. I unfolded the red folder and presented each document individually, detailing the intended impersonation, the time frame of deception, and my discovery behind the bookcase. The more Braddock realized the entire scope of the plan, the more solemn his countenance became. This is really unsettling, he finally stated. And you're positive that the purpose of the appointment for tomorrow was to have someone pretend to be you? Yes, based on these materials. Someone named Angela Weaver, who is reportedly a consultant for imitation, whatever that means. Braddock's fingers became stiff. We come across efforts at inheritance fraud from time to time, but they are rarely this complex and never involve close family members in such a manner. He hesitated. In light of the situation, Ms. Winters, I think we ought to call the police. I gave a hard shake of my head. Not quite yet. I want to know the whole story beforehand. There must be more to this story, even if my kid has obviously made bad decisions. As you like, he said. However, you should be aware that their plans amount to grave criminal deception. There might be serious legal repercussions if they bring an impostor to this office tomorrow. I get it. However, I want to learn more about Uncle Walter's estate before we talk about that. All of this has come as such a shock that I haven't even had time to comprehend the true nature of this bequest. Reaching for a heavy file on his desk, Braddock nodded. Naturally. Walter Edmund Winters created a will that was quite thorough and precise. When he opened the file, a picture of a beautiful stone home surrounded by trees appeared. The focal point of your inheritance is the historic property known as Winter's Haven. As I gazed at the picture, memories of my early visits came flooding back. I recall this location. When I was very little, we went there once. It was constructed in 1809 and has undergone extensive restoration by your uncle over the last 30 years, making it one of Vermont's best specimens of federal period architecture. The actual worth of the property is about $23,000. I gasped. Suddenly, the numbers in the red folder sprung to life. But that's only the start, Braddock added as he turned the pages. What Walter gathered and kept inside those walls is what really matters. Braddock said that the real worth is found in the things Walter accumulated over his life. He laid out a number of pictures on the desk. Each displayed halls brimming with display cases, antiquities, and treasures that had been meticulously preserved. Your family may have thought your uncle was a strange loner, but he was much more than that. He was one of the nation's leading private collectors of manuscripts from the 18th century and artifacts from the Revolutionary War. He just decided not to share his collection. I leaned forward and looked at the pictures with a fresh interest. Glass cases held maps with frayed edges, yellow documents in protective covers, and pistols that looked ancient. According to Braddock, this collection has been discreetly valued at about $1 million. It has first edition literature from the colonial era, original maps used during the Revolution, and letters signed by Washington and Jefferson. The heart of my librarian pounded. There was more to the value than money. These were priceless artifacts from the past. Furthermore, Braddock added, Walter had liquid assets and investment accounts totaling little more than $300,000 in addition to a trust fund your grandfather had set up that has increased to almost $1.8 million since it was founded in 1952. The figures were astounding. On my librarian's pension, I had lived well but sparingly, periodically fretting over future medical expenses. Suddenly, those worries were absurdly far away. Braddock produced the will and indicated that Walter was very clear about what he wanted. You will have unrestricted access to the property and all of its contents. He did, however, convey his desire that the historical collection would be preserved and eventually made accessible for academic study. I explained that it was a wish rather than a need. That's right. He had total faith in your judgment. Braddock gave a small smile. During our conversations, he said that you were the only family member that appreciated historical preservation as much as he did. You were referred to as the custodian of information by him. My eyes pricked with unexpected tears. This man, who held such high regard for me, I had hardly known. Whose life's labor he had given me. Braddock's tone changed as he stated, "There's something else you should see." He opened the file and took out a sealed packet. "This is a private letter that Walter left for you. I was told to deliver it just once I was positive that you were who you claimed to be." My name was written in a sophisticated, vintage style on heavy cream stationery. With shaking fingertips, I accepted it. "Do you want to be left alone?" Braddock made the offer. I gave him a nod, and he quietly walked out of the office, shutting the door. I opened the envelope cautiously, unfolding 3 pages of handwritten text, alone among the mahogany and leather. "I've finally given in to the unavoidable march of time, my beloved Grace, if you are reading this. Don't be sad. I am 92 years old and have spent my entire life surrounded by the information and history that kept me going after Ellen's death. You could ask why I have designated you as the only heir to all that I have created and safeguarded. The solution is straightforward. You recognize the importance of knowledge. I saw in you the same interest that fueled my life from the time you were a young child going to Winter's Haven with your father. You question not just the value of things but also their backstories. James, your father, was a good man, but he never had my enthusiasm for preservation. Despite his intelligence, your son has chosen a route that emphasizes acquisition above stewardship. The intellectual heritage of the actual Winter is carried by you alone. But there's another reason I made this choice, and your father never told you about it. In 1952, your grandpa Frederick created the Winters Trust as reparations as well as a family legacy. Your grandfather's studies and ultimate professorship were made possible by the first Winters' wealth, which was derived via the sale of historical papers that were, to put it simply, acquired through dubious means in the chaos that followed the Civil War. Late in his life, Frederick came to terms with this unsettling reality, and he created the trust in order to finally restore these historically important objects to appropriate public access. My life has been devoted to growing this collection. Restoring authentic materials whenever feasible and building an extensive archive that accurately depicts the history of our country. You now have the responsibility of choosing the final home for this collection. You will be courted by museums. Universities will present enticing incentives. Extraordinary sums will be offered to you by private collectors. Have faith in your judgment, just as I have. One last warning. Having money rarely improves how other people perceive you. Even among family, exercise caution. Character is revealed by money. It doesn't make it. Your uncle, Walter Edmund Winters, with the utmost love and assurance. I gently folded the letter after reading it twice and put it back in its envelope. Given what Nathan and Elise had previously tried, Walter's last warning felt uncannily accurate. Braddock came back to find me calm yet contemplative. I responded that Walter had brought up the Winters Trust and something about my grandfather's reservations about the original acquisition of some historical artifacts. Braddock gave a solemn nod. Yes, Walter and I talked about that touchy subject. Particular ethical guidelines on historical preservation and future public access were included in the Trust's creation. He was quite picky about who would inherit the collection, in part because of this. And my son plans to bring an impostor here tomorrow to claim all of this, I remarked, shifting the topic of our chat to more pressing issues. Indeed. This leads us to a crucial query. What would you like to do next? I carefully weighed my alternatives. The simplest course of action would be to call the police right away, report the attempted fraud, and let the legal system handle the rest. However, taking that route would destroy any chance of mutual understanding or reconciliation with Nathan. Finally, I responded, I want to be here tomorrow. When do they get there? Braddock appeared taken aback. Do you wish to face them head on? No, I explained. I'd like to watch first. I have to witness firsthand how far they will go with this lie. Could you make that happen? He gave it some thought. A meeting room with a one-way viewing window is adjacent to my office. When discussing an estate with several family members, it is sometimes utilized. You might observe the meeting covertly. Excellent. The librarian in me valued the opportunity to learn more before acting. And that would be your decision once I've had enough. You could face them head-on, or we could call the police. In any case, I would make sure they couldn't get your inheritance after they left. I gave a nod. A choice was made. After that, I'll be back before their appointment tomorrow morning. Braddock handed me a set of Winter's Haven keys as we worked out the specifics. While here, you might want to take a look around the property. After all, it is now yours. Everything became tangible and abruptly real when I felt the weight of the keys in my palm. I had anticipated stopping a scam when I traveled to Vermont. I would depart with millions of dollars worth of assets and a historic estate. Braddock also mentioned that the property has a caretaker. Mr. Harris knew your uncle well and has been taking care of the house and gardens for 20 years. If you like, he can give you a tour. The 4-hour drive back to Connecticut and the dogs waiting for me were more important than the allure of seeing Winter's Haven, my Winter's Haven. Other time, I murmured, getting up to go. I had to return right now before my son suspects me. My thoughts clouded the scenery as I sped south through the waning day. The family secrets, Uncle Walter's letter, and the collection with historical significance. All of it required concentration, which my mind was unable to supply, while I struggled with the confrontation that would take place tomorrow. It was already dark when I got into Nathan's driveway. The lights I hadn't left on flared throughout the home. And next to mine was an automobile I had never seen before. As I got closer to the front door, my heart was pounding. Had Elise and Nathan come back early? Had they found me missing? With shaking fingers, I inserted my key, preparing for conflict. The typical cacophony of 3 exuberant poodles welcomed me as soon as I entered the foyer, keys in my fist like a weapon. A brief respite was afforded by their warm reception. The dogs wouldn't be so at ease if there was a real problem, surely. Hi there. Who is present? I called, making my way carefully toward the brightly lit kitchen. Grandmother Grace. Inside. The voice that replied was that of Nathan and Elise's only child, Emma, my 24-year-old granddaughter. Since she accepted that research position at Boston University, I hadn't seen her in months. Emma? She was at the kitchen island with her laptop open and piles of papers all around her when I rounded the corner. The epitome of a serious academic, she had wire-rimmed glasses on her nose and her dark hair tied into an untidy bun. Unexpected. She smiled and came up to me. I thought I'd stop by for a visit on my way back to Boston since Dad said you were watching the dogs. Since the department meeting ended early, I thought it would be a good opportunity to catch up without Mom asking me about my romantic life like she usually does. She stopped when she saw how I was looking. Is everything all right? You appear to have seen a ghost. I soon regained my composure and gave her another hug. It's just a surprise. I didn't anticipate company. I got in thanks to the dog walker. I hope that's all right. Emma pointed to the papers scattered all over the island. During this time, I have been organizing my research notes for my dissertation on the influence of personal letters in the 18th century on revolutionary ideology. I realize it's exciting stuff. I almost laughed at the absurdity of her research topic, considering what I had just discovered about Uncle Walter's collection. I honestly said, that does sound fascinating. Carefully placing my purse down, with the scarlet folder securely concealed within. How long are you able to stay? Just tonight, if you don't mind. I have till tomorrow afternoon to return to Boston. Using the well-known practice to quiet my rushing mind, I busied myself making tea. Things were made more difficult by Emma's sudden appearance. I couldn't tell her about my journey to Vermont or my findings. Not quite yet. Not until I'd spoken to her parents about it. Emma accepted the steaming mug I offered and remarked, "So, Grandma. Today, where were you?" "You left a note regarding a doctor's appointment," the dog walker stated. I was surprised by how direct the question was. Emma had always been perceptive, missing little, just like her father. I lied, hating the dishonesty, but seeing no other choice, saying it was only a standard exam. Nothing noteworthy. Emma looked at me thoughtfully over the rim of her mug. It must have been a long drive, huh? When I got there, your automobile seemed like it had been driving for hours because it was so warm. Sharp observational skills are valued by librarians, unless they are used against them. My attention to detail was obviously passed down to Emma. I forced a light tone as I said, I took the scenic route home. The day was really lovely. I like to drive and think sometimes. What is it about? Still keeping a close eye on me, she pressed. After hesitating, I concluded that revealing a portion of the truth could pique her interest. Actually, about your great-uncle Walter. Have you met him before? Emma gave a headshake. Not in my opinion. Every now and then Dad brought him up. You mean some weird relative from Vermont? I believe he passed away recently. I verified 6 months ago while closely monitoring her response. Her face showed no recognition, merely a slight intrigue. I had no idea you were so close. Really, we weren't. However, something about him made me think of him today, and I started to wonder about his life. I took a sip of my tea before continuing. Has your dad brought him up recently? I don't remember. Emma had already returned her focus to her study notes. Nathan hadn't told his daughter about the inheritance, which is another sign that only he and Elise knew about the plan, even though Dad and I haven't had much time to communicate lately due to his and Mom's hectic schedules with business and travel. This felt comforting in a way. My granddaughter, at least, was not involved in the scam. What's up with your parents? I inquired informally. When I last saw them, they were quite anxious. Emma gave a shrug. As usual. Mom is completely enamored with remodeling the pool house. Dad works overtime all the time. The typical lifestyle of keeping up with the Joneses. She gave an endearing roll of her eyes. I occasionally question whether they still recall why they are putting in so much effort. If only she realized the true extent of their financial predicament and how right her appraisal was. Despite the day's revelations still weighing on my mind, I listened with genuine interest as Emma passionately described her dissertation research over the course of the following hour of relaxed conversation. I was strongly reminded of Uncle Walter's letter by her enthusiasm for historical documentation. This intelligent young lady did, in fact, carry on the winter's intellectual legacy. As the evening wore on, I came to see that Emma's presence was, in fact, beneficial. Her unexpected arrival gave me the ideal justification for getting up and getting dressed early the following morning so I could drive back to Vermont without causing the dog walker to suspect me. As we got ready for bed, I said to her, I hope you don't mind an early breakfast. Tomorrow morning, I have another appointment. Another doctor's visit? She inquired, her probing eyes still too keen for her comfort. I said hazily, just some errands I need to run. Nothing noteworthy. Later, while I lay in the bed in the guest room, I gazed at the ceiling and made plans for the following day. In order to get to Burlington in time for Nathan and Elise's 10 o'clock appointment, I would have to leave by 6. To make sure I wouldn't be noticed, I had instructed Braddock to set up a private door for me to enter. With Emma's arrival, the stakes had just increased. Whatever transpired tomorrow would have an impact on Emma's relationship with her parents as well as my connection with Nathan and Elise. She would be devastated to learn that they had plotted to embezzle her grandmother's fortune. But I couldn't keep her safe from the truth indefinitely. Our family had already suffered enough from secrets. I made up my mind in the dark. Regardless of the result of tomorrow's confrontation, would tell Emma everything about Walter's inheritance, her parents' dishonesty, and above all, regarding the historical collection that so well matched her scholarly pursuits. Maybe there is some upside to this unpleasant circumstance. A new generation of the family Walter had entrusted me with raising might be motivated by his legacy. After making that decision, I eventually fell into a restless slumber, the red folder safely nestled under my pillow, the confrontation of tomorrow looming like a tempest on the horizon. When I sneaked out of Nathan's house with a letter to Emma saying that I might need to spend the whole of the day running errands, dawn had just broken. As I made my way back north, the roads were almost deserted. I was more focused than the day before, and my determination grew stronger by the mile. After Braddock told me to park behind the building and enter through a service entrance, I arrived in Burlington by 9:30. There I was discreetly escorted to the conference room with its one-way surveillance glass by his assistant, who was waiting. The young woman escorted me through the back corridors and murmured, "Mr. Braddock asked me to tell you that your son and his wife arrived in Burlington last night. The Hilton downtown is where they are staying." Thus, they had already arrived and were getting ready for their show. I was curious about the enigmatic imitation consultant, Angela Weaver. Was she with them, being coached at the last minute to act like me? The conference space was subtle yet attractive. Discreet recessed lighting, leather chairs encircling a polished table, and a single wall that looked like a huge mirror but was actually the observation window Braddock had described. The assistant clarified that although they won't be aware of your presence, you will be able to see and hear everything. Mr. Braddock will be joining you just before the start of the meeting. Alone, I took the red folder out of my purse, sat down at the window-facing table, and waited. The wall clock was steadily approaching 10 o'clock. Despite the facts, my heart still found it difficult to comprehend the fact that I was getting closer to seeing my kid betrayed with my own eyes by the minute. Braddock came in at 5 minutes to 10, his face solemn. Without introducing himself, he declared, "They've arrived. 3 individuals. Your son, an elderly woman who vaguely resembles you, and a woman I assume is his wife." My stomach grew constricted. Angela Weaver would be that person. Yes. He sat down next to me. "I have one last question for you, Ms. Winters. Are you sure you want to go this route? We could still get in touch with the police and stop the scam effort completely." I gave a hard shake of my head. "You must show it to me, Mr. Braddock." He nodded, but his face was still marked with worry. "I need to understand how far they're willing to go," he said. "Excellent. I have directed Mr. Pearson, my associate, to lead the first meeting. He'll verify their names, go over the specifics of the inheritance, and move forward as though nothing were wrong. When you've had enough, I'll step in." "Thank you," I murmured, my voice a mixture of gratitude and fear. The door across the glass opened a moment later, and they went inside. Nathan arrived first, looking confident and well-groomed in the charcoal suit he saved for crucial business meetings. Elise trailed behind. Her blonde hair was styled in a chic updo, and she looked stunning in a designer outfit I had never seen before. The third figure, however, drew and held my interest. She was a lady of about my age and build, with silver hair that was strikingly similar to mine, and she was dressed in a cardigan and skirt that were uncannily similar to what I usually wear. Angela Weaver had thoroughly examined me. Had Nathan sent any more pictures than the one in the red folder? Had he explained my demeanor, my tastes, my usual clothing style? My blood ran cold at the deception's thoroughness. Mr. Pearson, a younger lawyer, got up to meet them. In turn, he shook hands with each. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you in person, Mrs. Winters," she remarked, politely addressing Angela. "Thank you for coming with your mother today, Mr. and Mrs. Winters." Nathan responded coolly, "Grace has been so nervous about completing everything. We would never consider leaving her to deal with this on her own." My hands uncontrollably clenched under the table as the well-known voice told such shrewd lies. Naturally, Pearson went on, motioning for them to have a seat. "Before we continue, Mrs. Winters, I must confirm your identity. It's standard practice for properties this size." Angela reached into a purse that might have belonged to me and nodded. "Of course," she answered. And I remarked coldly that she had picked up on the faint New England accent in my voice. "Here are my passport and driver's license." From my perspective, she supplied documents that were genuine. It was obvious that Nathan had acquired high-quality forgeries. After looking at them, Pearson replied, "It looks like everything is in order. Your uncle Walter Edmund Winters left you his whole inheritance, which is worth about $47,000, as we discussed over the phone. This comprises the Winters Haven property, its belongings, and other financial assets." Angela said, imitating my own modest manner, "It's still so hard to believe. I didn't have a close relationship with Walter. This was pretty unexpected. Elise said with a smile that stopped short of her eyes, a fortunate shock. Pearson did agree. Now, I do have one more verification question before we move forward with the official asset transfer. As part of the security protocol Mr. Braddock set up with your uncle, only the genuine Grace Winters would be aware of it. I stiffened, not expecting this to happen. Braddock, beside me, grinned a little. He whispered, a little improvisation. We'll see how they respond. Elisa's smile wavered as Nathan moved almost quietly in his chair. Nevertheless, Angela remained calm. Naturally, she said coolly. What are you interested in knowing? Before him, Pearson looked through a file. Could you tell me the title of the book that your Uncle Walter gave you for your 16th birthday, Mrs. Winters? It was important in establishing your love of books, he said. It's the ideal question, specific, intimate, and impossible to swiftly investigate. I waited to see how they would handle this unforeseen challenge. Angela paused, glancing briefly at Nathan, who nodded barely perceptibly. I think it was the first edition of Pride and Prejudice, she remarked cautiously. Walter was aware of my admiration for Jane Austen. It was a reasonable guess, but completely incorrect. The rare copy of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass that Walter had given me, together with a note about choosing one's own path, had in fact inspired my love of books and my choice of employment. With a bland tone, Pearson noted in his file, I see. And if it's okay with you, one more inquiry. What was the name of the cat you had as a child that Walter mentioned in his most recent letter to you? One more question that is impossible. Walter was undoubtedly aware that I had never kept a cat because I had been allergic since I was a young child. Angela didn't turn to Nathan for advice this time. Mittens, she said with assurance. Calico. She was with me from the age of 7 till I went off to college. Braddock wrote something on his legal pad next to me. Now there was proof of the forgery. The effort at fraud was plainly proven. I am grateful, Mrs. Winters. Pearson stated as he got up from his chair. Please give me a moment, I have to go to Mr. Braddock's office and get the last of the paperwork. Please settle in. Nathan leaned in the direction of Angela as soon as the door shut behind him. You did well, he replied quietly. However, that was evident across the observing system. It only needs a few more signatures to be completed. Elise screamed that the security questions had come as a surprise. You claimed that this would be simple. It's okay, Nathan said her. They don't need to question who she is. The docs appear flawless. I had had enough. The anguish of seeing their deliberate deceit had turned into icy reality. I looked over at Braddock. I'm prepared. Reaching for the phone on the conference table, he gave a solemn nod. Pearson, Mr. Kindly invite Mr. Sullivan to attend the meeting, and you can let our visitors know that we need to finish some more verification. The other room's door opened again a moment later. Braddock himself came in this time, followed by Pearson and a third suit-clad man who stood by the door. Winters, Mr. and Mrs. He paused, looking directly at Angela. Braddock stated firmly. The lady posing as Grace Winters. As the executor of Walter Edmund Winters' estate, my name is Harrison Braddock. Nathan's professional expression remained fixed as he straightened. It's nice to finally meet you face to face, Mr. Braddock. Is there a problem with the documentation? Mr. Winters, not with the paperwork, Braddock said coolly. The woman sitting next to you is not your mother, which is the issue. Braddock's speech was followed by 3 painful seconds of quiet. I saw Nathan's professional mask fall through the glass, displaying a moment of panic before he recovered. His voice was perfectly steady as he said, I don't understand. This is Grace Winters, my mother. Elisa's response revealed more. The color had gone out of her face. The man in the suit was still standing guard at the door, eyes flashing toward it. I'm afraid not, Braddock said in a composed although firm tone. We have unquestionable proof that this woman is not Grace Winters but rather a paid imposter. He looked over at Angela, whose poise had clearly wavered. I guess it's Ms. Weaver? The consultant for impersonation? Angela's shoulders slumped a bit, the meticulously crafted facade disintegrating when confronted head-on. Nathan objected, less firmly, that this was ridiculous. How could you possibly have proof? The actual Grace Winters was able to correctly answer the security questions you just failed, to start with, Braddock added. For the second, we have written proof of your scheme, such as invoices for Ms. Weaver's work and a very thorough schedule of how this fraud was to be carried out. Nathan's face grew stern. Without any evidence, you are making grave charges. I insist on talking to your manager, or even better, our lawyer. Braddock passed a phone over the table and said, by all means, call your lawyer. In fact, considering the circumstances, I strongly advise it because legal counsel would be prudent. An investigator with the Burlington Police Department named Mr. Sullivan has some inquiries about attempted inheritance fraud, which is illegal in Vermont. The detective moved forward with an abruptly more commanding attitude. I want you all to stay seated while we work this out, Mr. Winters, Mrs. Winters, and Ms. Weaver. Elisa's silence was finally broken. With a hint of dread in her voice, she muttered, Nathan, do something. My son's self-assured exterior appeared to be collapsing. He started, there must be some misunderstanding, but his tone reflected his desperation. The time had come. Braddock punched the intercom button when I nodded. Please send her in. I entered their meeting room as the door opened again. In another setting, the scene in front of me, 3 faces frozen in astonishment, bewilderment, and horror, would have been almost humorous. As she looked at the lady she had been paid to pretend to be, Angela Weaver actually gasped out loud, putting one hand to her throat. I said softly, hello, Nathan, in a steadier voice than I had anticipated. Elise. Mom, Nathan's lone phrase was filled with bewilderment and growing fear. How did I find out about your scheme to embezzle my fortune? I put the red folder on the table and completed for him. This is what I discovered beneath your bookshelf. He stared at the folder after Coco knocked over a vase and water spilled into your office. His face were washed over with despair and recognition. You looked into my personal documents? In a pitiful attempt to regain moral superiority, he asked pathetically. Documents with my name and picture? Indeed, I did. I looked at Angela, who appeared to be attempting to blend in with the background. The physical similarity is wonderful, but Walter would never have given me Jane Austen. Her work, in his opinion, was academically mediocre but financially acceptable. Elise abruptly retreated from the table. Before I continue, I would like to talk to our attorney. That's a smart move, Detective Sullivan said, but I should let you know that we have sufficient evidence to press charges of conspiracy, identity theft, and attempted fraud. Fees? Numbly, Nathan repeated. You can't be serious, Mom. It's a family issue. A family issue, I repeated, letting my hurt and rage finally show. You planned to defraud me of millions. You falsified records. Someone was hired to pose as me. When exactly did you decide that treating your mother in this manner was appropriate? At last, his face appeared to register shame. Desperate, he murmured quietly. The investments didn't work out. The market plummeted. We were on the verge of ruin. I came to the conclusion that you chose to take from me rather than merely asking for assistance. Would you have donated millions to us? Despite her obvious apprehension, Elise challenged in a combative tone. We won't ever find out, will we? Because you decided to be dishonest instead of truthful. I looked over at Braddock. Please give me a moment to myself with my son, Braddock said hesitantly. Just Nathan, I explained, considering the situation, Ms. Winters. The detective and the others can wait outside. Following a quick discussion with Sullivan, plans were established. A law enforcement official accompanied Elise and Angela as they were led to different waiting areas. Nathan was unable to look me in the eyes as he sat there looking gaunt in his pricey suit. Silence fell when the door shut behind the others. Even though I knew Braddock and Sullivan were observing through the observation glass, this felt like a very intimate moment, a mother-son confrontation that had been simmering since I'd first found the red folder. How long has Walter's inheritance been known to you? Finally, I asked. Nathan took a deep breath. 3 months. After failing to get in touch with you directly, the law firm got in touch with me. And instead of telling me about it right away, you chose to steal it? It wasn't instantaneous, he muttered. I was planning to inform you at first, but we lost everything when the Meridian venture fell apart. The mortgage on the house exceeds its worth. The vehicles are rented. For years, Elisa's company has been losing money. You concluded that I wasn't worthy of receiving my own inheritance. He argued that it wasn't like that. Mom, we were drowning. There was no other way out that I could see. And you never thought that I might have offered my assistance voluntarily? That if my only son had just been honest about his problems, I might have told him? His silence was sufficient response. None of this is known to Emma, is it? I inquired. He glanced up abruptly. Emma? No, of course not. Why would you? When I got back from Burlington last night, she was at your house. She's from Boston and is here. His face flashed with panic once more. Don't tell Mom about this, please. It would ruin her perception of us. I clarified that you meant it would expose the truth. When did you start prioritizing appearances over integrity, Nathan? Who is more willing to perpetrate fraud than acknowledge financial failure? His eyes fell to his tightly clutched hands on the table, and he was unable to respond. After a prolonged period, I said, the detective is waiting. Nathan, this will have legal repercussions. I shouldn't, and I can't, shield you from that. His voice was hardly heard when he questioned, are you pressing charges? I'm still undecided. I was instantly worn out by the disappointment and treachery. Whether you accept responsibility or keep trying to defend the unreasonable will determine what occurs next. He eventually looked up as I approached the door, his eyes sparkling with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I am aware that's not enough. Somewhere along the journey, I got lost. I no longer even recognize myself. It was the first real time we had spent together since this nightmare started, a glimpse of the kid I had raised instead of the desperate man who had planned my downfall. Even while it wasn't enough to undo what he had done, it was something to cling to, a tiny glimmer of hope that maybe we could find a way to go on in the future. I know, I answered quietly, Nathan. The most agonizing aspect of all of this is that I also don't recognize you. I dropped him off there and went back to the observation room, where Braddock waited politely. Ms. Winters, what do you want to do now? Gently, he inquired. I inhaled deeply as my choice became clear. I'd like to see Winters' sanctuary. Today. Prior to making any further decisions. We traveled via winding country roads with maple trees that were just starting to bud on the way to Winters Haven. Perhaps worried about how I would feel after the altercation, Braddock had offered to go with me, but I had graciously rejected. It was necessary to travel alone. After obtaining official statements from all involved parties, Detective Sullivan released Nathan and Elise on their own recognizance, giving them stern orders not to leave the state while possible charges were pending. Angela Weaver had already started to cooperate with police, seemingly shocked by the gravity of her involvement. Verifying that she had been employed especially to pose as me. As I followed the GPS directions through increasingly rural settings, all of it seemed far away. The property was located in the foothills of the Green Mountains, approximately 30 miles outside of Burlington. At last, I turned onto a small lane with a subtle sign that said, Winters, and my heart started to rush with excitement. Before abruptly opening to expose a clearing and the house itself beyond, the gravel path wound through thick forests. Braddock's office snapshot hadn't captured it well. The haven of winter was amazing. With 3 floors and symmetrical wings spreading from the center structure, this majestic federal-style palace was constructed of local stone. Dormer windows punctured the slate roof, and mature oak trees stood vigil on either side, resembling ancient guardians. After parking in the circular drive, I took a seat and took in the fact that I now owned this historic treasure. I nearly burst out laughing at how ridiculous it was. The owner of what could only be called an estate, a retired librarian who had worked her entire career in a small apartment. The door opened before I could grab it as I got closer to the wide front steps. A tall, grizzled man in his 60s appeared, wearing work clothes, his face tentatively kind. He rang Miss Winters. "Mr. Braddock called to let me know that you could be in today. I am the caregiver, Edward Harris." "Yes, Mr. Harris. I appreciate you taking me in without warning." He warmed his wrinkled cheeks with a smile. "No need to give notice, ma'am. Now this is your home." Walter was very clear about that. "Your home now," was a simple sentence that gave me a sudden rush. A home, not just a piece of property to look after or an inheritance to safeguard. "If you'd like, I'd be honored to show you around," Harris said. I helped Walter construct the collection and knew him for 20 years. "That would be really appreciated," I said, trailing him into an awe-inspiring entry hall. Through wide windows, sunlight poured into a room that was somehow both opulent and hospitable. Every feature of the old architecture had been painstakingly maintained. Wide plank floors, crown moldings, and a curved staircase with a beautifully carved railing are all features. However, what really captured my attention were the contents. The walls were lined with glass exhibition cases that held meticulously placed historical artifacts, documents illuminated by special lighting, coins, miniature weapons, and other objects that I couldn't immediately recognize. Oil paintings of revolutionary fighting scenes and portraits of somber-faced individuals dressed in period attire hung between the cases. Harris led me farther inside the house and said that Walter had arranged everything chronologically. "The entrance hall has the oldest relics, mostly pre-revolutionary items." He referred to the primary collection as the archives room. We pass a formal dining room and a library, both of which are exquisite but obviously subordinate to Walter's actual love. A room that would have made any museum curator jealous was then revealed as Harris opened a pair of double doors. The entire first-floor east wing was devoted to the archives room. Humming softly in the backdrop is a large room featuring cathedral ceilings, specially designed exhibit cases, and a cutting-edge climate control system. Maps and documents were displayed in conservation frames on the walls that were not covered by cases. In the middle of the room was a huge table with glass covering its surface and meticulously placed study items underneath. "This is where Walter spent most of his time," Harris replied, his tone becoming more respectful. "Investigating, cataloging, and communicating with archivists and historians across the nation." Few were aware of how much he had gathered. Regarding the collection, he was quite discreet. The historical significance of everything around me swamped me as I slowly made my way around the chamber. Diaries of troops and citizens who witnessed the formation of a nation, original letters signed by the founding fathers, and maps used during significant revolutionary conflicts. Did he ever permit the use of these documents by researchers? Considering Emma and her dissertation, I inquired. Very selectively, but sometimes. He struggled to strike a balance between preservation and accessibility, particularly as he grew older. Harris pointed to a book on the center table that was leather-bound. Every item in the catalog, together with its provenance and historical value, is listed there. I carefully opened the catalog and discovered hundreds of pages of painstakingly handwritten entries. Walter's commitment to preserving history extended well beyond simple collecting. It took a lifetime to complete. "There's another item you should observe, a top-notch academic endeavor," Harris remarked, guiding me to a door at the archives room's far end. This was dubbed the Legacy Chamber by Walter. He organized it for a large portion of his last year. Beyond, there was a smaller area that was less formal and more intimate than the others. There was a cozy reading chair at the window with the view of the mountains. The walls were lined with bookshelves, but they contained leather-bound books and family photos rather than antiquities. With a start, I recognized the desk at the center. I whispered that it was my grandfather Frederick's desk. I recall it from visits as a child. Harris gave a nod. Walter intended for this space to serve as a link between the family history and the historical collection. He referred to it as the legacy of the winter. There was only one thing on the desk. Another crimson folder, older and with more worn leather than the one I'd found in Nathan's office. It bore my name in Walter's characteristic penmanship. Harris continued, heading toward the door. "He left instructions that you were to find this when you were ready. I'll let you be alone." I sat down in the chair behind Frederick's desk, alone in the legacy room, and carefully opened the folder. There were other smaller envelopes and another note, written just a few weeks before Walter's passing. You have embraced the duty I have given you, my darling Grace, if you are reading this in the legacy chamber. What needs to happen next is the subject of this second letter. The collection you are viewing embodies historical justice as well as preservation. Many of these objects were first obtained by dubious ways in the years following the Civil War, when my grandpa, Jeremiah Winters, bought them for pennies on the dollar from destitute Southern households. After learning about this painful past, Frederick started the process of properly documenting and preserving it as a kind of compensation. I've carried on and broadened this quest, but you have to write the last chapter. The collection is too valuable to be haphazardly distributed, but too important to be kept secret. I've done a lot of study on 3 possibilities, which are included in the envelopes. Organizations deserving of this legacy, each with unique capabilities and strategies for public access and historical preservation. It is entirely up to you to decide which course to take. Regardless of your choice, a portion of the trust has been set aside to guarantee the collection's continued integrity and upkeep. The house itself may be included in the legacy plan or retained as a family residence. Once more, it's completely up to you. Don't forget what I said at George's funeral. Frederick's intelligence was passed down to you alone. I can now see that you also inherited his compassion and integrity, which are crucial for this last responsibility. Walter, I have total faith in your judgment. I put down the letter and looked through the 3 envelopes. The Vermont Historical Society, Harvard University's research library, and a recently founded historical justice organization devoted to reuniting historical relics with their native communities each included comprehensive plans. The decision weighed heavily on me, yet oddly, I felt up to the challenge. Walter had noticed a quality in me that I might not have fully acknowledged, a stewardship ability that went beyond simple ownership. I thought of Nathan and Elise, of Emma, of the complicated connections that had brought us to this point as I gazed out the window to the mountains beyond. My son had attempted to steal an inheritance that had never actually had anything to do with money or property. It has to do with trust, accountability, and legacy. How would I respond to this surprise present? How would I strike a balance between the conflicting demands of family healing, access, and preservation? The answers weren't immediately obvious, but I felt purpose instead of betrayal for the first time since I found the red folder under Nathan's bookcase. There was more to Winter's Haven than a mansion or a collection. It was a second chance, a chance to salvage something valuable from the ruins of shattered faith. My reverie was interrupted as Harris knocked softly on the door. Winters, Ms. It's growing late. Are you going to spend the night? You can always count on your uncle's quarters to be ready for visitors. After days of emotional upheaval, I was attracted by the serene surroundings and gave the offer some thought. Emma, however, was waiting at Nathan's house, oblivious to the drama taking place all around her. Naturally, the dogs also required attention. I'll be back soon, Mr. Harris, but not tonight. Very soon. Grace has learned that her fortune truly serves a goal of justice and historical preservation in addition to providing her with cash. What choices will she make about Emma's future, Nathan's fate, and the priceless collection she now protects as she gets ready to return to Connecticut? Get the last chapter of this stirring family story by subscribing now. The seasons changed steadily over the course of 6 months, with spring giving way to summer and summer fading into fall. With their red-gold canopies reflecting in the quiet waters of the little lake behind the house, the maple trees that surrounded Winter's Haven suddenly blazed with October brilliance. On the patio, I stood. As Emma oversaw the installation of new conservation lighting in the archives room, I kept my hands warm with a cup of tea to combat the morning chill. Her knowledge had been very helpful in carrying out the choices I'd made regarding Walter's collection. Since that fateful day when I had found the red folder under Nathan's bookcase, a lot had changed. The road ahead had not been simple, it had involved tough decisions, uncomfortable discussions, and, in the end, a total rethinking of our family's destiny. Nathan and Elise had been the subject of my initial decision. I had decided against filing criminal charges after speaking with Detective Sullivan and Braddock, subject to 2 requirements: full financial transparency and required community service. With modest appreciation, Nathan had agreed to these terms. When confronted with the possibility of prosecution, Elise finally gave in after first objecting. The fallout had happened organically. The burden of exposing deceit was too much for their already troubled marriage, which was already strained by financial desperation. They had split up 3 months after the altercation in Braddock's office. Nathan obtained a job teaching finance at a smaller college, moved into a small apartment, and started the gradual process of restoring his integrity. Elise's meticulously crafted social facade was in ruins when she returned to her family in California. Emma had been distraught when she found out, but we were all shocked by how resilient she was. Following her initial outrage and shock, she had immersed herself into assisting me in creating the Winters Historical Trust, a charity whose goal is to preserve Walter's collection's historical integrity while granting researchers access to it. Grandma. My daydream was interrupted when Emma called from the doorway of the terrace. This is the conservation expert. She wants to talk about the schedule for document rotation. Coming, I said. Before returning to the practical issues at hand inside Winter's Haven, which was bustling with intentional activity, I took one last look at the autumn landscape. My final decision regarding Walter's collection had been a hybrid one, maintaining the collection at Winter's Haven while establishing it as a restricted access research center connected to both the Vermont Historical Society and Harvard University. Next month, the center will formally open with the arrival of the first batch of well-screened researchers. In July, I had made arrangements for a young librarian from my previous job to sublease my flat, and I had moved permanently to Winter's Haven. An appropriate continuation. Emma had paused her doctoral studies to become the first academic director of the trust. The collection she assisted in curating became the subject of her dissertation. Dr. Abigail Chen of Harvard's Conservation Department waited with schematics and preservation plans in the recently refurbished conference room, which had been a formal dining room that was rarely used. She was 35 years old and contributed modern knowledge to Walter's careful but occasionally antiquated preservation techniques. Mrs. Winters gave me a kind greeting. Emma and I were just talking about the Washington Correspondence Rotation Program. We can make these letters available without endangering their condition by maintaining appropriate climate control and limiting exposure. The meeting went well, marking yet another step in turning a private collection into a historical research tool. At the end, Emma said nonchalantly, "Dad called this morning. He wants to know if we need him for the Jefferson papers next week since that he has completed the catalog digitization effort." I nodded as the mention of Nathan evoked a complex range of feelings. He had started working with the trust by cataloging and digitizing the inventory of the collection as part of his required community duty. However, after months of consistent effort, something had changed. Walter had seen in our family line the passion of a true historian, and this passion had awoken in Nathan, giving him a purpose beyond acquiring material possessions. "Yes, tell him," I said. "Those documents will require serious consideration." Emma and I ate lunch on the patio after Dr. Chen left, taking advantage of what might be one of the final warm days before winter arrives. In between mouthfuls of her meal, she said, "The grant proposal is almost finished. If it's accepted, we can add virtual tours to the educational outreach program for schools that are unable to pay for field trips." Her excitement made me smile. Walter would have been pleased. "History shouldn't be kept hidden from those who need it most," he always said. Emma's tone changed to one that was more hesitant when she spoke about locked away. "Mom from California called yesterday." I lifted my eyebrows in astonishment. Since the split, Elise has hardly spoken to either Emma or Nathan, only occasionally speaking to him through lawyers. "She's interested in coming," Emma went on. "Claims to have been going to treatment and re-evaluating her priorities. Wishes to offer an apology face-to-face. Are you convinced by her?" I asked thoughtfully. Emma gave a shrug. "I'm willing to listen, but I'm not sure." Her potential for forgiveness strongly reminded me of a choice I had made early on in this path to give hope for redemption even in the face of severe betrayal. It was about making room for change, no matter how improbable it might appear, not about forgetting or making excuses. Despite our past, I meant it when I stated, "Your mother will always be welcome here." After all, this site is about preserving human relationships that are valuable, not just artifacts. Emma saw the layers in my response and reached across the table to squeeze my hand. Later that afternoon, I was sitting at Frederick's desk in the legacy room, as I usually did when I was thinking about big decisions. The crimson folder that contained my documentation of our family's recent history, as well as Walter's original, was spread open in front of me. Harris, who had remained as a caregiver and developed into a reliable friend, was called by a knock at the door. "Ms. Winters, Mr. Braddock is present for your quarterly meeting." "Do I have to let him in?" Gathering my notes, I said, "Please do." Although our connection had grown significantly over the months of working together to build the trust, Braddock arrived with his usual formal formality. Following first greetings, he reported that the financial statistics are very optimistic. The restricted access strategy has drawn substantial grant funding, and the trust's investment portfolio is doing well. "Your uncle would be happy." Looking at the family photos that adorned the bookcases, I remarked, "I think he knew all along what this place could become. All he needed was someone who had the same vision." We discussed the pragmatic issues of endowments and operating expenses, but just as Braddock was about to walk away, he stopped, his face softening. "Ms. Winters, you've done something amazing here, if I may say so. After what your kid tried, many people in your situation might have taken a very different route." I pondered what he had said, recalling the many forks in the road I had encountered since learning of Nathan's treachery. How simple it would have been to file charges, to completely wipe him out of my life, to make me resentful of the prospect of making amends. Finally, I stated that the money and property were not the genuine legacy. It was the duty to protect what was important, both individually and historically. Walter knew that. I believe I do now as well. I did my evening rounds of the property, something I had done since I moved in, as Braddock left and twilight descended upon Winter's Haven. The living quarters where Emma had moved into the West Wing, the newly refurbished research spaces, and the archives room with its treasures. The tiny sitting room, which had grown to be my favorite sanctuary, was always my last destination. In contrast to the larger areas, this room contained my personal belongings, books, and pictures of George, Nathan as a child, Emma as she grew, and now, prominently displayed on the wall, a recently commissioned family portrait of Emma, Nathan, and me taken in the Winter's Haven Library. Certainly not an ideal household. Not without suffering and betrayal. However, it was a family striving for something more than personal shortcomings. I took a seat and read a book, content with the understanding that leaving a legacy is never easy. They are made up of victories and setbacks, knowledge and errors, harm and recovery. Walter had trusted me with his legacy because he knew that preservation was about making something living out of what history had to offer, not about preserving the past in amber. An inheritance has been attempted to be stolen by my son. Never understanding that its actual worth was found in the chance to make a difference in something bigger than ourselves, not in bank accounts or real estate titles. Perhaps the best gift I could give him was the opportunity to contribute to a legacy worth creating, rather than pardon without responsibility. Like family or history, the maple leaves outside my window were continuing their spectacular autumn dance. Each one was distinct, fleeting, and a part of a cycle of rebirth that had begun long before us and would continue for a very long time. The memory of the winter endures, reshaped by Grace's insight and kindness, much like the tales we decide to keep alive and the futures we dare to envision. We appreciate you following us on this emotional journey of forgiveness, betrayal, and realizing that what we choose to keep is what truly counts as our heritage rather than what we own. Please subscribe and leave your opinions in the comments section below if this story resonated with you.